Okay, I guess we're back. Once again, I thought my experiences at Daniels Junior High School at Broughton, I thought there were just a bunch of great people. No one, here we were, kids from the Methodist home, and we always went to public school. We went to half of us went to I think it was called Sherwood. No,
Sherwood Bates.
Sherwood. What is that? The one that's in Five Points? Myrtle Grove.
Myrtle Underwood.
Myrtle Underwood. Yeah, half of us went to Myrtle Underwood, and the other half went to Wiley. And then we all went to Daniels, and then we all went to Broughton. But nobody ever said boo to me. Nobody ever said one cross word to me. Tried to make me feel bad about living, in an orphanage. And if there were mean, cruel people, I'm sure there were some, but no one ever said to me, said anything mean to me, and I didn't feel different. No one tried to make me feel different. So, and that was a unique thing. And I continued on when we got to Broughton High School. I continued on trying to stay involved. And certainly one of the most important things that happened at Broughton High School was, and I was very close to Dan and Ford Worthy and Jim Hamrick, and we all ended up getting on the stage crew, which was the coolest thing ever. And so we, you would be sitting in class, and if they had a stage to set up for an assembly or something, go, would all the stage crew please report to the gymnasium? And we get a chance to get out of class and we go play for 45 minutes and set up for assemblies and stuff. And Neil Gustafson, and met Bill Hassler and Neil Gustafson, and just a bunch of great guys. And our class. Judy Volk and CC and Dottie Hassler and Joe Middleton, and these were all just great. We had an absolute blast doing that, and we worked hard. That was sort of the whole experience. We'd go down there and we'd set up the assemble. We'd have 700 chairs to put out, and we'd get these chair lines, and we'd throw chair to person to person to person to person, and set them all up. We could set up an assembly in no time, because we just, they had a great system, and that was a terrific experience. And that was just, once again, it was something staying involved, and being around other kind of people that were just, you get to make a bunch of new different friends, and it was a terrific experience, and I enjoyed that. When I got out of the Methodist home, when I graduated high school, and basically on the last day of school, they gave you a steamer trunk. It had a set of sheets, a towel, a pillowcase, and a wash rag and something like that. And they said, adios. That was it. There was no transition period. It was, once you were aged out at the Methodist home, and you were, by grade wise, you were on your own. And I had been in a couple of clubs at school. I was I was on the FCA, and same thing, just trying to be involved in a bunch of stuff. And there was a club at school called the High Y, and it was, I was in that club also, and that was run by the Raleigh YMCA, and I was able to, through my relationships with Neil and Ford and everything, I was able to get an interview to go work at Camp Seafair, because my only real option, other than, I had no money, I had nowhere to go, I had no family. Once I moved to the Methodist home, basically all connection to my family was lost after maybe the fourth grade. I had very little contact with anybody. Don't know what happened to my cousins. Never saw them again or anything like that. So I had no place to go unless I went back and lived and moved in with my mother and my stepfather, and I wasn't really welcome there. So I went and worked at a summer camp, and I had a place to stay all summer until college started. And I'd gotten into East Carolina and was looking forward to that, and I became a food service counselor at Camp Seafair, which was one of the greatest experiences of my life. There were a bunch of guys from Broughton that were there, but there were other people also. But Bart White and Neil Gustafson and Dick Proctor and Jeff Bittler and a bunch of these great guys who had all worked at this camp a couple of years before them, before I got there. And I was a part of a rookie class with Dan and Ford. And, you had to scrape garbage, had to scrape plates into a big old garbage can. That's what you did. You were wet garbage. But we had a great system at Camp Seafair. It was tough. I mean, we had to get up every morning at 5:45, and we had to get ourselves up. Somebody had to walk around in the morning and wake 20 guys up, because we were the kitchen boys, but we were the kitchen boys at a girls' camp. There were 20 guys and 600 girls. It was cool. It was cool. There were about 150 counselors and 450 campers. From all ages, first grade all the way up to the 7th or 8th or 9th grade is, kind of when they aged out of camp. But camps were great. They were all run by the Raleigh YMCA. But we had to get ourselves up. We slept at Seagull, but we worked at Seafair, which was 8 miles away, and we had to get up and get on a bus. And, I remember, dragging a blanket across the grass, trying to get to the bus without passing out and, falling back asleep. And then we get on the bus, we ride over. But when we got there, we were all business. We worked from 6:30, took us, probably, by the time we got to the bus and rode the 8 miles over to Seafair, we got there at 6:30, and we worked from 6:30 to 9:30, set up, serve the girls, clean up the mess hall, and then we had a break from 9:30 to 11:30, and then we did the whole thing all over again. We did it from 11:30 to 2:30, but between 9:30 and 11:30, we could play softball, we could go swimming, we could go ride motorboats. It was like we were campers, and we had a great time. These were very well-run camps. I think I said, but it's called Camp Seagull and Camp Seafair down on the coast of North Carolina, and they're just a little town called right outside of Oriental and Arapahoe in that area. And then we worked from 4:30 to 7:30, and then went back over to Seagull and spent the night. And the camp had a curfew of 12:30, so especially after the first year, if you were of course, the drinking age was 18, but rookies, first year people weren't supposed to be able to drink. But, the second year you could go out and have a beer. You were of legal drinking age and whatever, but we didn't have any camper responsibility. So we would just go, they had a very strict schedule of time off for the counselors, but not for us. We had, once again, we had no responsibility, so we could go out every night. But 5:30 came pretty dadgum early in the morning if you stayed out to 12:30. So you had to, and somebody'd walk around, Neil Gustafson walk around, and he'd just shake you, just put his hand there and say, "Bus rolls in 10, bus rolls in 10." And you had to drag yourself out of the bed, and get on the bus, lay across 2 seats, and try to get 5 more minutes of sleep. But when we got to camp, it was all business. And it was maybe one of the greatest learning experiences of my life that served me well later in life, because there was a culture, and that culture was we were a team, and nobody's job was done till everybody's job was done. So when you finished your job, you went and looked for something else to do. You picked up a broom, you picked up a squeegee, you helped the pitcher boys put the pitcher back on the rack, whatever it was, you did. And then when everybody's job was finished, we were done. But if you didn't pull your weight in that camp, especially young first year guys who just didn't really understand that, they were brutal. And the peer pressure, they would, they would rag you mercilessly if you didn't pull your weight in that experience. And it was, like I said, one of the most fabulous experiences of my life, because you learned that you became a team and you were friends and you helped your friends through any, whatever it was they were involved in. You helped them, finish up so they could get their tasks accomplished. And that group of young men who were those food service counselors, that was my experience between 18 and 22 years old. And now I'm 69 years old. And most of the guys that were in that era between 1974 and 1980, 1978, we're all still best friends. There's a group of us that gets together. Neil Gustafson has a breakfast, and Dan and I are going in the morning, and he has a breakfast every Wednesday morning for food service guys. Every morning in Raleigh, every Wednesday morning in Raleigh, he just says, serving breakfast, food service guys are invited. Now, the people that were the wannabe food service guys that were kind of at the camp, like Peter Williams, we let Peter come, but not very many other people are included in the group. And they'd always ask, and they say, can I come to your breakfast? And they go, nope, you're not food service. If you're not food service, you're not, you can't come. So it was kind of a club. That was a fraternity for me. And
Cool.
Now I will go back a little bit. When I went to college at East Carolina, my freshman year, I joined a fraternity. I was a Sigma Phi Epsilon, and it was kind of a, I'm off at college all by myself, and I've always been part of a living community. Camp C Fair, I was a part of a community. At the Methodist Home, I was a part of a community. And I kind of felt alone in a room all by myself in college that I didn't know anybody else. And so I found a fraternity and I joined it. And, I guess there's a couple of other things that I'll talk a little bit about in my life, but there is a kind of a short story that I would like to tell you about me joining that fraternity. That kind of reaches all the way back. So I thought about rushing. I went to a teak house a couple of times, and then I said, well, I'll just stop in the middle of the day and see what these people are like. And, I went by the house and nobody said a word to me. Just kind of wandered around. And so nobody said, who are you? Why are you here? Because I would have said, I came to your rush 2 nights ago, but, nobody even spoke to me. So I was kind of wandering around campus, and I walked up to the SIGAP house on a Monday night, and I knocked on the front door, and through the front door I heard, go away. I went, okay. So I start walking back down the sidewalk, to leave. And I'll check this place out. And guy comes around through one of the side doors, and we had a front door and a side door. And it turned out they were having a ritual brotherhood that night. And so, you couldn't come in the front door and nothing could happen. They go, listen, why don't you hang around and we'll talk to you after the meeting. And, turns out there was a guy named Tony Burton who went to Broughton High School, was a year older than us. Tony was in that fraternity. He and I had been in Brigadoon. And I remember Tony was a great guy. And I met some other guys, and I said, I'll join this fraternity. And they said, well, come, you're welcome to join. And they said, the first meeting is, of the pledge group, come in a week on Sunday night and be here at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or something like that. But back at the Methodist Home, when I was in the 5th grade, we started going to the YMCA, and I was so small, and the Methodist Home had a hand-me-down room of clothes. So I went up to the hand-me-down room of clothes, was trying to get a bathing suit, and they couldn't find a bathing suit small enough for me, so I got a bathing suit, and we just tied the string all the way around my waist and kind of double-tied it, but it was the closest thing that they could get that would fit me. and went to the YMCA and jumped off the diving board. I'm in the 5th grade, jump off the diving board, and I went under the water, and the bathing suit did not. It sat on the top of the water, and I'm in the swimming pool completely naked with 150 boys and girls who were all 11 years old. You can imagine. Swam to the side of the pool, screaming bloody murder. One of the counselors throws a towel in. I wrapped it around me, yanked me out of the pool, and every night when you finished the YMCA and they were picking you up to take you home, they would show movies, and I don't know how many times we saw Scarecrow. Scarecrow, Scarecrow. I mean, they must have showed that movie 1,000 times. But so we'd all sit and watch these movies on an 8mm screen or something, and they would give us fireballs because Wyatt Taylor, who ran Camp Seagull, and he loved fireballs and he loved sugar daddies. So they would give you a sugar daddy or a fireball. Well, that night at the movie, they came out and they gave me a sugar daddy that was this wide and this long. It was gigantic, I guess, to compensate for the trauma that I had experienced that night in the swimming pool. So I show up at my very first fraternity meeting, and one of the older brothers comes in, and they had, there were 11 of them, or 10 or 11 of them already there getting ready for the thing, and he brings me in to introduce me to the group. Said, "This is Benjie Minton. He just pledged, and he's going to be your newest pledge brother." Well, there was a guy in that group who eventually became the best man at my wedding, a guy named Dewey Priest. And Dewey grew up on the other side of Raleigh. He went to Enloe High School, never met him before in my life. And Dewey looked at me and he goes, "I know you SOB. You're the guy that got that big ass sugar daddy." In the 5th grade, he had held a grudge over that dadgum sugar daddy for 7 years over somebody he'd never met before. He remembered that I had that sugar daddy. So that was kind of but I loved being in that fraternity, and same kind of situation. We had just an incredible group of guys, and those are all basically my best friends. I met my wife in that fraternity, married her. We have 2 beautiful children, Taylor and Carr. I now have a 1-year-old grandson. I've just lived a charmed life. I don't know. Every time God closed a window, he opened. Every closed a window, he opened, or the other closed a door, he opened a window for me. So every time something happened, there would always be something better, for the next experience, and that's just kind of been the story of my life. I was in the pharmaceutical business for 27 years, and then eventually got laid off from that job. And a gentleman that I had met at a conference, I bumped into him at the hospital one day, and he said, "My company's actually looking to hire somebody," and he said, "My boss is coming down Friday, and I want you to talk to him." And so I met him at a Wendy's. We talked for a little bit, and at the time I was selling IV antibiotics, and so I was calling on surgeons and stuff, and this particular job was working with surgeons with a surgical instrument for debridements.
Now that's in Wilmington?
Yeah, well, at the time I was living in Greenville. And I'd been laid off, by Wyeth, anyway, maybe 3 weeks or so. Mm-hmm. And I went and met with his boss, and he kind of liked the experience that I'd had in dealing with surgeons, because I was, even though I was selling a pharmaceutical as opposed to a surgical instrument, mm-hmm. I had the experience in dealing with the same clientele. And he said, "Well, we have a distributor in Charleston, a guy named Andrew King." He said, "I'll submit your name to him." And Andrew called me up. I never filled out a resume. I never went to an interview. He hired me over the phone, the same kind of thing. God closed a door, he opened a window. And, you know, it's just like I said, I don't know how it happened, but it just did. And,
How did you end up in Wilmington? Oak Island.
Yeah, well, my initial territory in the pharmaceutical business, I was in Charlotte. My wife and I were living in Charlotte at the time, and I, worked for A.H. Robbins, and then we got bought out by Wyeth. And then I had applied for a job, a hospital job in Greenville. I wanted to get back to the eastern part of the state. And I ended up not getting that job. They ended up hiring somebody. It was kind of a, it was a, the regional manager knew some guy. I thought I had the experience, and I certainly had, knew the area well. But he ended up hiring him for that job, and I took another job in Wilmington, and with a different manager, basically selling the same thing. Though that wasn't a problem. And then I worked for them for 27 years, and it was a job, and had did a fair amount of traveling. I was out 2 nights every 2 weeks, so 52 nights on the road, but still it was a good job, and and ended up in Greenville because I finally got promoted and became a hospital rep, and that's why I was selling Zosyn to the surgery residents and attendings and things like that, and infectious disease people at ECU and New Hanover. But I ended up getting this other job just kind of out of a fluke, and I get a chance to go in the operating room and see doctors, or I just retired, but I got a chance to go in and see guys with these terrible wounds and diabetic feet and things that, you just feel so terrible. And what the surgeons did with my device gave those people a chance not to lose a foot or a leg or whatever. And you felt pretty good about what you did every day. I didn't even take my job as a job. It was more of a responsibility. It was huge customer service. If somebody would call me and say, we got a broken piece of equipment here and we got a case at 3 this afternoon, I'd drive 6 hours to take them my demo unit, because we weren't going to miss a case, because that meant you miss a patient, and you miss giving that patient the best opportunity to heal. I want to talk a little bit about my wife, Karen. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. We met in the fraternity. We dated, got married right out of college. And
where's she from?
Karen is from Raleigh. She was she's 3 years younger than us, so my class. She graduated at high school in '77, so we wouldn't have crossed paths. Plus, she went to Sanderson, but she was a DZ, and I met her through my relationship at ECU. I'm not exactly sure how to kind of go back to this, but when I was in college, my stepfather passed away, and this is also a kind of part of the reason, or how I ended up meeting my mother, or meeting Karen. My mother, when my stepfather passed away, it was his house, and my mother didn't. It was paid for. It was his family's property, and they wanted to sell the house, and so they basically sold the house out from under my mother, and then she was left with nowhere to go. And I kind of arranged for her to become the house mother at the sorority house that eventually it was the house that Karen ended up pledging, and I kind of met her through that, not through that relationship, but she was the house mother for Karen when she was a freshman that one year. And she, the problem was, though, that my mother, who had never really been much of a mother, I mean, I'm sorry to say that, but but she wanted to mother these girls, and a whole bunch of girls moving into a sorority house didn't want another mother, and so it was a tough experience, and for her, and she only lasted a year, and then it eventually moved back to Enfield, which is where she had lived with my stepfather, but she ended up, becoming a private duty nurse and moved in with a couple of old ladies and lived at their house and cared for them until they passed away, and then she ended up moving to Raleigh. What was kind of a unique or tough situation for us, though, was, I'd never lived with my mother since the second grade, not even much through that. But when I graduated college, my mother thought my mother literally thought that she and I were going to move in together and be a family, and that was tough. I was a young man. I wanted to go to work. I wanted to get married. That was never going to happen, and that was kind of a tough conversation to have. I mean, she thought we were going to get an apartment together, and that was never to be. So, I don't know, feel sorry for her, but that really kind of wasn't, that none of it was my fault, So it was a tough for her. Maybe she lived a kind of a hard life, but that's kind of my story. And
Yeah.
but do you want me to talk a little bit about my cancer, or is that?
That's up to you.
No,
That's
no.
okay if you don't want to talk about
Yeah,
it. Tell me a little bit about your children and what their activities were growing up.
Yeah.
What were they in sports?
Yeah. I mean, well, Taylor was a lot like me, and Carr was a lot more like Karen.
Okay.
Taylor and I, and she, we just had sort of the same temperament, and that she's. And I've called her Love Bug since she was born, and she's still my love bug, even though she's 38 years old, and she's just a sweet thing, and sensitive, and was in plays and singing and all this other kind of thing like that. Carl, on the other hand, was into mischief. He was tough. I mean, we tried to, take him into Boy Scouts and could not keep him. He and 3 or 4 other boys, they were always cutting up, and he was tough. And now Carl was the smartest person in the family, but he was tough. Carr, he went on, and it was interesting because it took him a long time.
Yeah.
To realize how smart he was, and how that he needed to accomplish things. He just didn't have anything to care about until he met his wife. And he met his wife, and she's tough as nails. She is the sweetest thing, but if he doesn't keep up, she will leave his butt in the dirt. And once he met Whitney, it was all over with, and we could not be happier. She's just the most wonderful thing, and we've got the sweetest little grandson, Samuel, and he's 1 year old, and he is wide open. And Whitney was very accomplished. She had a tough life growing up herself, and she persevered through it, and she put herself through college and put herself through. And I will tell you, Carr had a couple of bump-ins with the law. He ended up, when he was in the 11th grade, he threw Petey the Pirate off of Dowdy-Ficklin Stadium and got in a lot of trouble with that, and he did some other things. And when the very first time we met Whitney, she was working at the law office that we were going to get Carr out of trouble. So that was our first experience with Whitney. But she knew of his reputation, but she didn't care. So
she loves him.
Oh, I know, they're just the cutest things. But I will tell you this about my son. I've been sick for a very long time, and I got sick in 2018, and Cara and Whitney got married in 22. But like I said, she put herself through school. She has a master's degree. She had great jobs, and when she had Samuel, she quit to stay home with him for a year. I mean, she quit a great job, and she's now starting to look again because Samuel's 14 months old and whatever. But it was important to her. She budgeted. She saved her money so she could do that. It was amazing. And I got sick, and we didn't know what was going to happen. I have a very rare form of prostate cancer, and a couple of years ago, I didn't, the cancer was spreading and things like that, and so I had no idea if I was going to live 1 year or 5 years or whatever. And I said, let's all go to Florida for Christmas. So we all went to Disney World. Cara, Whitney, Taylor, Karen, and I. And we went down for a week, and we did, just when they had, right at the very beginning of December, they had just opened up all the Christmas parades and things like that. And I said, let's just go make a memory.
Yeah.
So we rented a condo down there. My daughter Taylor, this is right after COVID, and she had lost her jobs here in town and had gotten a job in Las Vegas. Wow. She went out to Las Vegas. It was interesting. A friend said, let's go to Las Vegas. There's work out there. And she gets out there, and she's there with this friend, and the friend abandoned her after 2 months and left her out there with a lease and everything, and she had to fend for herself. She had no support groups or whatever, and she just persevered, through the whole experience and whatever. And so Taylor was in Las Vegas, and we were flying her in for the thing, and Cara and Whitney and Karen and I flew down together, and we got there before her, and she calls us and goes, I missed my flight or something. Something happened. I can't remember what the circumstances were, and she was distraught. And I think they had sent her to the wrong gate or something, and so she missed the flight. In Las Vegas, she'd never been to the Las Vegas airport before. And my son immediately jumped on his phone, and within a minute, now this is the kid who never, you couldn't, he was kind of happy-go-lucky. Within 2 minutes, he had already booked her a new flight. And he goes, you got to go to gate 45. They're boarding in 45 minutes in that area. He had already booked Taylor another flight. He came in. I was sick. I had cancer in my hips. I wasn't supposed to pick up bags. I never opened a car door. I never picked up a bag. My son was the dad on that trip. I would, it almost brings you to tears. We'd be in a ride, and the ride would finish, and at the end of the ride, I'd start to get out of the chair, and there's my son with his hand helping me out of the thing, and he became the dad, and I was so proud of how he has done, and he's just been an amazing human being. He's an incredible father. He's an incredible husband, so the whole experience has just been the best thing ever. Like I said, God closes a door and opens a window. So
that's beautiful. And Taylor is where now? Still?
She's living with us in Durham, in Raleigh, in Oak Island. I'm sorry, I live in Oak Island. Yeah. But Taylor is living with us in Oak Island, wonderful. And she has a couple of jobs, and she's, when she came back, living out in Las Vegas, and not knowing anybody or this, that, and the other, she ran up, some debt, and she moved in with us, and
great.
Moved in with us, and every month, if she had an extra nickel, she paid off her debt, and it's the best thing ever. I mean, she's just, the both of them are just great kids, and we could not be prouder of both of them. And if, inevitably she's going to move away, but that would be bad. That would be sad.
You want her. Well, I got to say one more thing before we finish. Benjie's a wonderful person, as you can tell, and tell about Miss Purnell naming her dog after you. The little brown poodle.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
I had at the Methodist home we had visitation families, and I became my best friend in high school and in late middle school was this guy Buddy Purnell, and he and I were both managers of the football team. That's how we met when we were in the 8th grade. And so Buddy went, got his parents to go to the Methodist home, and they signed up to be a visitation family for me. So they could come check us out of the home, and then we could go spend the weekend with them. It wasn't, like I said, it was kind of corporal. They needed to make sure they knew where everybody was. When you were in high school, you had a little more freedom to leave, but even not then, not very much. But so the Purnells would come, and then I'd just spend the weekend with Buddy, and we'd hang out and with friends at Broughton and friends at Daniels and this, that, and the other, and had a great time. But the Purnell, they got a little poodle, and Mrs. Purnell named the dog after me, so which was kind of a cute experience. I don't, that it makes you feel kind of cute that they cared enough about me to do all of that for me, and then to check me out, to name their dog after me. So
Thank you, Benjie. Let's give him a hand.